Thank you so much, Austin, for taking the time today and coming on the show. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. Really appreciate you hopping on. You're obviously, co-founder and CEO of Lambda School. A lot of people tuning in, I'm sure, are familiar. Maybe not everyone knows. So it'd be great if we could kind of, start with your story from kind of as far back as you're willing to go, really, and then we'll dig in on some points, I'm sure, and then maybe a brief introduction of Lambda School would be a great place to start as well.
Awesome. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. And good to be able to chat. By way of introduction, I'll describe Lambda School first, and then we can go as far back as you'd like to go. I'm sure it gets boring pretty quickly, but Lambda School, we train people to be software engineers and data scientists in live online classes. And one of the unique things about Lambda School is that it is free until you are hired, making more than $50,000 a year, and in the field that you studied for, or using the skills that you studied for. And if that's not true, then you never pay us. So I think we're one of the first schools ever to really put our money where our mouths are, and we have our incentives aligned with the incentives of the student, which creates a very different learning environment, generally speaking. But yeah, that's Lambda School.
Cool. Yeah. A couple questions on that actually before we get into your story. And, I want to spend a good amount of time on Lambda School, but like a couple quick things based on what you mentioned up front. I've been curious, what if someone goes and gets a job and they're making $100,000 a year, but they're not like directly applying what they learn at Lambda School? Is that something where they can kind of, are they finding a workaround there, or like, do you plan for that? Because obviously like you're teaching them certain, computer science skills, whether it's like a data analyst or whatever it is, building apps. But if they go and do something that's maybe tangential, are you still, is it kind of reasonable and fair in that way?
Yeah, so we still collect payment if it's tangentially related. So for example, if you study to be a web developer and you end up being an iOS developer, I mean, you're certainly using the skills that you've learned in the school. If you, so you can come up with a bunch of different scenarios. If you end up being, a bartender, as an example, then you don't make payments. And at the end of the day, if there's disagreement around whether you do or don't use those skills, we use an arbitrator to determine that. But the high level is, look, we're not looking to screw anyone, and we hope that no one is looking to screw us. And so, everybody's operating under good faith that, you're going to try to find a software engineering or data science role. And, if you get hired, then you pay the tuition. And in 99.9% of instances, that's not tricky or challenging to figure out which side you're on. If you're driving for Uber, like, yeah, you shouldn't pay us,
Right.
even if you are making above that amount. If you are a product manager at Facebook, like, yeah, you should pay us.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I didn't mean to imply anything. I know you guys have good intentions,
No, not
but
at all.
some
Totally fair
people,
question.
yeah. And on the other side, I was concerned, like even myself, I don't really know how to code, and like Lambda School looks awesome. And like, I personally I'm not really willing to like commit the time at this point in my life. But if I were to be like, it would be really interesting to kind of learn the skill set, but then I don't actually want to go and be like a web developer. So I was just, I didn't know if there was people like that in the world that were kind of going in with the wrong mindset. I would obviously try to do it in like a fair way. But you also mentioned, aligning interests, which I think, and incentives, which I think is super important in education at large. And it's certainly kind of not the case overall. One interesting thing, like, you briefed the ISA concept, which is that people don't really have to pay until they get this job, as we're talking about, income share agreements. One unique thing about the way that you guys are executing those, I don't know if it's unique, but it's different certainly than some other providers, is that you guys as a school are offering these ISAs to the students, whereas other platforms, from my understanding, are offering it kind of directly to students, and then they can go to kind of whatever school they want and kind of use, benefit from that payment structure, or I suppose on the other side, maybe not benefit, but you guys are directly providing the ISAs and therefore kind of investing in the success of your students and the effectiveness of your program. Was that like a conscious thing up front where you guys, were really focused on aligning incentives in that way?
Yeah. So initially, when we first started, we didn't have the ISA as an option. It was just, we were talking to students and saying, hey, what can we do to make this better to, more serve what your actual needs are. And all the time it was like the thing students were afraid about was, having to make payments, even if it was some kind of loan without, having the income to support that or using the skills that you learned. So we started out as a school and then layered in ISAs when they weren't really a thing, which I think is really important. It's not, we don't get a giant check from some other provider, and even if we did, it's not, you know, payments are by definition tied to your income and your success. So I think, we are very vertically aligned in that way. But even if there were a world where somebody weren't doing that, in an ISA, at the end of the day, if you don't get hired, you don't get paid, and that's not true for other financial instruments. So I think, the doing it directly is superior, but not necessarily required. I think at the end of the day, what you should be looking at as a student, looking at an ISAs or other methods of payment is, when do you make payments, when do you not make payments, how much are those payments, and kind of do the full analysis. And in that regard, I think Lambda School's ISA is dramatically better than any other payment mechanism I've ever seen, and that is because it's us doing everything. We're doing the admissions. We're doing, we created the terms for the ISA. We use a servicer to help with the collection side of thing, but we're somewhat involved in that as well. And I think we've learned in business over the last few years that the more that you control, it becomes more difficult to do, but then you can make a more elegant solution that works, from end to end.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. How did you mentioned like when you first introduced ISAs, it was fairly, new and unseen at that point. How did you kind of come across this model or sort of, maybe invent this model and decide that it was the right approach, regardless of you guys doing the whole thing internally, just the model itself of giving people the opportunity to tie the cost of their education to the success of, their career thereafter.
Yeah, so I certainly didn't invent it. It was kind of invented by an economist named Milton Friedman in the 50s. And there had been a couple of experiments run with it. So there's an experiment at Yale where they basically said, hey, for people who want to choose, this method of payment, we're going to lump everybody's tuition together, and everybody will pay, 15% of their income toward it until the entire lump sum is paid off. That ended up being a failure because there were, a bunch of students who joined the Peace Corps and said, "Yep, not going to pay anything," and then there are a bunch of students who went into investment banking and were making mammoth payments. And basically, the people who went into investment banking were paying off for the folks who went for intentionally low income jobs until that had expired.
Mhm.
Another instance was David Bowie actually created an ISA, and sold kind of his future income, so that he could make a record. Um, and then there have been similar experiments kind of in sports. For example, like if you get hurt in the NFL, then you're in trouble, and you might prefer a guaranteed 200K a year for life in exchange for 50% of whatever you make over $1 million a year in the NFL or something like that. But yeah, we really just originally paid a lawyer to create a document that reflected that, and started from there. And it's much more advanced, as you can imagine. But that was, honestly, it was just, hey, let's create a form that people can fill out and sign, and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know the Bowie story. That's interesting. That was before like he was really successful.
I was actually after.
Huh.
I think he tied it to a few albums. If I remember correctly, it didn't end up paying out as well. But I think that the novelty was enough that some investment banker somewhere thought it would be cool to own a percentage of David Bowie's future income. So why not?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I've thought of kind of like a similar concept probably around the time you were kind of starting to build Lambda. Obviously, didn't do anything with it on my end, but just the idea as like, and I was thinking of myself as like not the company, but the recipient of the ISA. Like I would have loved to post graduation. I say it, who knows if I would have actually done it, but I think I would have loved to, like collect, $100,000 over 2 years in exchange for, 2 or 3% of my income for X number of years. That was just like a concept that seemed really interesting to me as someone who had like taken a gap year during college and kind of realized the benefits of like having some free time and traveling a little bit, working on more of like a passion project than a career. So it was cool when I discovered Lambda School, more recently, maybe a year or two ago, to see that you guys were really putting that to work and you're actually giving people a very tangible and monetizable skill in terms of teaching them to code. Let's rewind now to how you got to where you are today. Understand you have like a really interesting background with a lot of risk taking along the way, and certainly seems to have paid off. Although I'm sure you kind of still see yourself at the very beginning of the journey, and I'm sure you are. How, I guess, going way back like to when you were growing up, curious to know, like, this is something I ask people sometimes, like, what was like the first thing you did for money? Like, did you have like kind of an entrepreneurial spirit all along?
Yeah, so it's funny in my family. So my mom, this wasn't true when I was growing up, but now my mom and my dad have both started companies. My older brother started and sold a company and now runs another one. My little sister runs her own company. So most of us are either self-employed or have started and sold companies and that kind of thing. That wasn't true when I was growing up. My dad was like an accountant. Um, but one of the things that was unique about the way my parents ran our house is they didn't really pay for anything outside of rent and food and like the very basics. But even as far as school clothes, you were expected to earn that money, even if it was um, you know you could work for my mom or mow the lawn or do whatever and it would pay not very much. Or you could go find a different way to earn that money. So because of that, we all, I think, became pretty entrepreneurial. Like you learn pretty quickly that there are way better ways to make money than weeding the garden for $1 an hour. So I started, did everything from selling candy bars in school to um, where it really took off is when eBay came around, because that was the first time that you could be. So before they had security built in, I created an account under my mom's name and then switched everything to my own information. So somehow through some like, what I guess is a failure of security, I had like a credit card when I was 14, which is not normal. Um, and then, so yeah, I was buying and selling iPods and tickets and whatever else I was into at the time, soccer balls and jeans and buying and selling on eBay. And that was really the first thing that I did. That eventually the ticketing thing turned into a company that made a couple $1 million that I never saw, but that was my first foray into entrepreneurship.
And did you kind of start any more, official ventures? I know we can get to like kind of, just before Lambda. I know you started another business, but anything like in your childhood that was, an attempt at starting a business more so than like the eBay buying and selling, which is plenty more than a lot of young kids do. But I'm just kind of curious.
Oh yeah, there were dozens of them. Yeah, the one that worked was the ticket buying and selling. And so when I turned 15, so we went to New York for the first time. I'd never been to New York City before, and we got tickets for Wicked, which was like a brand new musical at the time, and no one had ever seen it, but we saw a couple interesting reviews. And so like everything at that point, I I like looked on eBay to see what ticket prices were, and I found out because I was so used to eBay being like the discounted everything. It's like the Amazon before Amazon really took off. I thought eBay was gonna crush Amazon for sure. That was super wrong. Um, but we looked at ticket prices, saw that they were super expensive, and tried to figure out why it was. And turns out, um, you know, people who bought tickets 6 months ago were selling them on eBay for a profit. And I thought that felt, like something I could do. So the cool thing about eBay at the time was you could actually review the completed auctions. So you could see what everything had sold for at, ever on eBay. So you could actually do market research in a way that's tricky for now. Now you see prices, but you don't know, what quantities are selling or how often it's selling. So me and my brother kind of did enough research to figure out what was working well, and then kind of emptied out his life savings into tickets, and doubled it in like a week. So then it ended up growing into a not sophisticated but pretty successful company. And that was the first major thing that I did kind of back in the day.
That's awesome. And I was doing something a little similar with sneakers. It sounds like I should have been in tickets. I was just making about enough to like buy a new pair of sneakers every few weeks for myself, and that was about it.
That's a win.
Yeah, no,
That's
it was
great.
exciting back then. But it sounds like tickets was the move. Later on, in your kind of like, growing up, I understand you did like a mission in the Ukraine, grew up, in a Mormon family. Can you, I heard, I don't know if I heard or I read something in preparing for this that, you said it was like some of the most formative times in your life, but it was also, some of the hardest and like some of the most depressing days, just being in a foreign country, like barely speaking the language, being given like kind of a fool's errand of the assignment of the mission out there. Can you kind of shed some light on what that experience was like? And was that like a before and after thing for you, where you went in one way and kind of came out another?
Yeah. So the background there is Mormon men, I suppose, when they turn 19, according to the religion, are kind of required to go on a mission. So what the way that works is you kind of save up your entire life to be able to afford it. So you pay for those 2 years, and you basically send in an application to the church headquarters, and then they send you a letter back that says, "Hey, you're called to serve in this area." So I had studied Spanish all through high school and actually spoke it pretty well by the time I graduated. So I was pretty sure I'd be going to South America for of some sort. Um, and then the mission call came and it said, "Hey, you're going to Eastern Ukraine, an area that, well, it was Ukraine. Now it's kind of known as the Donetsk People's Republic, was the center of my mission. And there's kind of an ongoing war there now, or I guess a fight over whether it becomes Russia or whether it becomes independent or whether it remains part of Ukraine." But yeah, so when I was 19, I got shipped out to Eastern Ukraine. You spend a couple of months in the missionary training center trying to prepare to teach people about Jesus and to try to pick up a little bit of the language. But everybody kind of recognizes that you're not going to learn it well enough that you'll be able to communicate very well when you're in the country. So you have to kind of start from scratch. But yeah, I landed in Eastern Ukraine in a little town called Gorlivka, which is like a tiny little mining town. And it was like January of 2009. So right after the financial crisis hit, and the city I was in had like north of 50% unemployment, and alcohol was cheaper than water. So
Bad
it was
combo.
just sheer chaos. And I don't speak the language. This is my first time ever having been out of the United States, except for like I went to vacation in like Aruba, which is not really leaving the United States. That's just you go to the portion of Aruba that's the same as the United States, honestly. And yeah, I mean, that was definitely a formative period of my life where I learned, I learned a variety of things. I think among the most important that I rely on now, we were out knocking doors or talking to people on the street for at least 12 hours a day. And nothing I've done in entrepreneurship comes even close to how difficult that was, especially in winters when it's -30 and you're still just out trying to figure it out, knocking doors, and everybody hates you and nobody listens to you. Another was just like a level of confidence knowing that like everybody around me saw the world very differently than I did, and that that's okay, and that doesn't mean that like the volume of people who believe something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And it's okay to disagree at scale, I suppose. Um, yeah, it was just a really intense time when I learned a lot about myself and uh, everything from how to set goals and achieve them to how to do things that you really don't want to do to all sorts of stuff. But that was definitely one of the most formative, I mean, the formative period of my life, I would say.
So I mean, 12 hours a day knocking on doors is like pretty absurd. Like that's a lot of that's a lot of rejection, I would imagine, and a
Oh yeah.
lot of unpleasant work. I guess on the, so on the one side it helps you develop a work ethic. If you can do that for 12 hours a day, you can do slightly more pleasant work at the very least for 8 hours a day or plus. I'm sure is quite comfortable at a certain point, but it all comes back to what you're used to and kind of the norms. And then on the other side, you probably got pretty comfortable with the failure of it. Has that been kind of a recurring thread in your life where you might have built up a bigger tolerance for rejection and failure, just like over and over again, that a lot of people just frankly wouldn't be able to handle and keep getting up and going back?
Yeah, yeah. I remember when we first went out there. It's kind of a tradition that the first thing that you do when you're brand new is you go knock on the door of somebody you've met and try to like introduce yourself and sell them on Jesus, so to speak. And the Mormonism is a particular kind of American friendly religion. There's a lot of kind of American Protestant work ethic themes in it. It involves, not drinking alcohol, no sex before marriage, no smoking. So I like to say there is just not product market fit in Eastern Ukraine. Um, and you almost become immune to rejection, honestly. Like I came back and I worked a sales job, and the stuff that would really bother everybody else, it just didn't phase me anymore. I at the end of the day, it felt like, and it still feels like today, no matter what, I'm sitting in this comfortable chair and I've got all of the food that I need, and it's not cold and it's not warm, and like I'm gonna be totally fine. So you just kind of overcome the mental anguish piece, I suppose, and it doesn't matter anymore. And it's all just about, what are the goals? What am I trying to do? And that's definitely not how I approached life before I went on the mission when I was like in high school. It was all about, you know, how can I get what I want quickly and work as little as I need to get there. And that just kind of goes away.
So I was scanning through your website a little bit. You have some like notes up on there, and one of them I just remember the headline was like something around discipline makes for freedom or discipline enables freedom. And it sparked up in my head because what you're talking about is like being appreciative of like being in a comfortable chair and like you're gonna be fine. That for me personally has like definitely worked as a mindset, but when I get too comfortable for too long, it starts to, the benefits of it start to disintegrate a little bit. And so
Hmm.
I've kind of experimented, I'm 26 and still very much figuring things out as I go. But uh, like for instance, like I've experimented with running like a good deal in terms of like a good distance with a regular frequency just to kind of do something hard every day to kind of maintain the gratitude for, basic comforts, having food, things like that. Is that something that you would all think about in terms of like keeping certain aspects not challenging, but like keeping discipline in certain ways and making things tough for yourself in certain ways, not in like a sadistic sense, but like just to maintain, the recognition that like having enough food and like water and like a family and a comfortable home is really all that you need.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this with kind of relation to my kids all the time, because even like no matter what, my kids are going to grow up in a different environment and with more privilege than I had or my wife had. And I'm sure, we're not by any means we were not by any means at the end of the spectrum. There are people who have, more difficult and challenging circumstances by a whole lot. Um, so I think a lot about how to instill that specifically in my kids. For me, I feel like I'm just used to the idea of pushing myself to the point of failure, that I can keep pushing further and further. And one of the ways that I enjoy doing that is with fasting.
Hmm.
Um, so, only drinking water. I can go a week, no problem. After that, it starts to get a little bit hard. Um, and there are actually a lot of health benefits to doing that, but it's as much a mental thing as it is a health thing. Um, but I think, yeah, there is definitely something that has become unfashionable about just pushing yourself. And now I feel like a lot of folks are trained that if you're pushing yourself, that something is wrong, or if you're struggling, you need to change the circumstances around you instead of just pushing through. And frankly, I see that within our school, and it worries me to some degree. I don't know what the solution is, or how to force people to have that circumstance or that learning experience, because I don't think I would have if I hadn't gone to Ukraine. I I, I went to college for long enough. I didn't finish, but I definitely didn't experience that in college. I suppose maybe some people do. But yeah, I think that ability to discipline and push yourself is one of the most precious things that humans have. And I worry a lot about the rate at which that's becoming unpopular.
Can you elaborate? I want to go back to the fasting as well, but before we do that, can you just elaborate on like what you mean exactly by like pushing yourself? I know it's like somewhat self-evident, but I'm not sure exactly I understand. Like you're talking about it kind of being like a lost skill and you're concerned. Are you talking about kind of like this, like what's, America's becoming soft type of thing, or just that like hard work isn't valued anymore? Kind of, can you just, provide some detail there maybe to help me understand a little bit?
I think I don't know if it's generational or if it's just always been true, but I definitely feel like the average American is like ridiculously soft. And part of that, is after I lived in Ukraine for a couple of years, I lived in China for a while, and just like the challenges that will cause many Americans to shrivel up and say I can't do it are like laughable in a lot of other places. And like we are so blessed in many instances. You know, even those who don't have, you know, what you would think about as the perfect American upbringing, like, spend time in other countries. There's certainly people who have less than you, almost no matter what, and who are figuring it out and are happy and fulfilled. And, I want everybody to feel happy and fulfilled, but I think in the United States specifically, we expect our situation and our circumstances to be what causes that, and I don't think that's true. I think we over-index a lot on expecting the things that will make us happy and successful not being the things that will make us happy and successful. And I don't know a better way to describe that, but I'm really worried about losing that. And I think you can look over time in history at the civilizations that forget that tend to fall. You tend to get too comfortable. You tend to get too prideful. You tend to get too stuck in your ways. Um, and I think that's risky. And I think we're at a point where it makes me nervous. I may be over indexing. I may be wrong, but I'm nervous.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it makes total sense to me now. And I think that like one of the things that I think about somewhat related is that we're close enough to the same age that we've grown up like in approximately the same times, and like yes, there was the financial crisis and or the recession or whatever, and then there was like 9/11 was obviously an awful event, but for the and there was war in the Middle East and everything, and I don't mean to trivialize any of these things, but generally like we've grown up in a time, I think that people, I think people in our generation take for granted how like good of times it's kind of been. And
Totally.
COVID coming has and even COVID, it's like in the scheme of things, you know, not it could be worse. It's again certainly awful and don't mean to trivialize it by any means, but could be worse. And I just keep saying, and like the thing at the Capitol the other day, like also, could be worse. Really bad, could be worse. And I think that um taking a larger lens and a broader lens and looking at history and seeing all of the just like objectively kind of worst times that have come upon humanity and different civilizations along the way. It's like the things that we complain about and argue about these days, a lot of them are kind of nonsense from my perspective. And don't mean to tag that onto kind of what you were saying, but I think it's kind of a related point. Going back to the fasting now, that's pretty, you kind of dropped pretty casually that you're fasting for like a week at a time. uh Sometimes I've been fasting for I don't know, 2-3 years maybe now, but pretty much just 16 and 8, like skipping, like eating
Yeah.
an early dinner and skipping breakfast like 5 days a week. It's kind of been probably the most popular thing I've done. And then more recently I've started doing like one meal a day, kind of like an earlier dinner, which has been nice. What was kind of the evolution of your fasting practice, and what are some of the key benefits that you've seen along the way?
Yeah, I think I go into most things very intensely. So I started with one meal a day, and now I'm not doing one meal a day now. I'll do 16/8 or 24, stuff like that more often. But honestly, it was a year and a half ago when I was super out of shape. I was like not healthy at all. I've been focusing so much on Lambda School that I hadn't taken care of myself, and it was actually my board sat me down and was like, dude, you're like, I don't know if you realize this, but since you started the company, you're up, like you're getting really fat. They said it in nicer terms. Um, but the so I, got a personal trainer and started working out, and I started actually researching like, what do we know about nutrition? What do we not know? And a lot of it is way more fuzzy than I would have guessed in the early days. And then I started, actually the first time I ever fasted was Lambda School had a retreat, and it was at like a resort and everything was catered. And so I ate like way too much, and I was just mad at myself. So I was like, is there just like an intense way that I can get some of that back so it doesn't take me another 3 weeks of like slow progress? Like, what happens if I just don't eat for a few days? I was going to had another trip in New York. I was like, what if I don't eat for the entire trip? The trip was only 2 or 3 days. So I started, doing research and learned that like actually it's pretty reasonable and actually pretty healthy net to do that. So I did my first like 3-day fast before I did anything else, and I felt great. Like I wasn't thinking about food. I wasn't anyway. Just I felt like centered and refocused, and obviously it doesn't like the I don't recommend it as like the weight loss strategy, but it certainly helped me get back on track. And since then I've just been pretty good about it, to where I'll have on and off times, but it's rare that I go for too terribly long without doing any kind of fasting.
What do you think is the longest you've fasted?
A week. I've done a couple of week-long fasts, but a week is a while. Like by the time you're done with the week, you're like, all right, I'm ready to eat again.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt it. I think like for me sometimes even just like on the one meal a day, I have like zero problem with 16 and 8, at least like 95% of the time. I'm just like, not even thinking about food. It's amazing, etc. But with the one meal a day, sometimes around like 2 p.m., I'm like, like got this to do, but like kind of want to eat. So I can
Totally.
imagine 4 days in, it's like, that can certainly bubble up as well. Um, Another kind of interesting chapter from your story, you spent some time living in China. I understand you kind of went there with like a small suitcase. I don't know if you were kind of like a minimalist before that or because of that, or maybe that was from your time on the mission as well. But would love to talk about kind of, minimalism and China in whatever order you kind of want.
Yeah, I mean, so they kind of, I can't decide how related they were. I mean, part of being on a mission is I think I moved, you know, 10 times over the course of 2 years. So you get used when you move a lot, you get used to the idea that like most of the junk you have, you're just not going to use. And you notice it more when you're packing it up every 6 weeks and then not using it again for another 6 weeks and then packing it up again. Um, but I really went through kind of like I think as a result of being in Ukraine, um, I started reading a lot about, I got into like, for lack of a better way to describe it, like secular Zen. Um, so the people who are focused on just trying to create focus in your life. Because before the mission, I was super distracted. I was always online all day long. And then on the mission, like it's super intense to where you don't read books outside of the scriptures for 2 years. You don't use a computer outside of half an hour for emailing your family. And just I felt my mind like slow down and focus in a way that I'd never done when since I was a kid. Um, so I love that feeling, and I love the feeling of being out of my comfort zone, of pushing myself, and of being focused. So when I went back to college, I found it to be none of those things. It was just a big, I don't know, I didn't enjoy or appreciate it, honestly. So I decided that I wanted to get back into that same environment. So, and I was young enough that I could do whatever I wanted and nobody cared. So I bought a one-way ticket to Shanghai. I packed one suitcase, and I kind of vagabonded around China for a while. And that's when I got really, really into minimalism. Like I, got rid of my third pair of socks, and now I have way more pair of socks than two. But yeah, I loved the simplicity and focusing on the things that really, really matter and ignoring most of the things that don't felt really freeing to me. And I think that's just the way my mind works. It's really easy for me to get distracted. So I love just the focus.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a minimalist myself and like totally appreciate that perspective and the reasoning for doing it. Do you think of minimalism at all in the context of not just material things, but kind of the ways that you spend your day and like the activities that you do, the practices and habits that you have in terms of like cutting things out that are kind of a waste of time or that you don't need and really focusing in on, whatever it is, 3, 5 things, whatever that kind of build a core structure for your days?
Yeah, I'm probably not as good at it as I should be right now, but I definitely think about it a lot. I mean, so both, within Lambda, we've I've we added a value, which it's anyway added a value um, that's kind of like less but better. So we do fewer things now than we did in the past, but we hope to do them higher quality. We boiled down what we're working on for 2021 to basically two things. So just outcomes and student experience. As far as my like personal life, I basically am working, reading, working out, or spending time with my family. And I don't really do anything outside of those four things. And those are the four things that I really want to do. And it's great. So yeah, I think there's definitely more to minimalism than like, you know, how much stuff do you have? It's really strongest in eliminating all of the unnecessary stuff. So I've nuked a whole lot of my calendar. A year and a half ago, I found myself in like 10 hours of back-to-back meetings every single day, and only half of them were important. And now if you look at my calendar, it's still a couple hours of meetings, but they're the meetings that I want to have. And they're the meetings that are focused on the things that I really want to move the needle on. And, I think the main thing about minimalism is it's saying no to a whole bunch of things that are just okay, so you can spend more time focusing on the things that are great. And that flows through from material stuff to where I don't even really have a closet. I have like a handful of shirts, but I love all of the shirts. Or so it's just kind of a way of life of having fewer things or doing fewer things, but focusing on making those things great.
Yeah, I back that 100%. And try to live that way kind of myself. Another thing, I'm just gonna go kind of jump around a little randomly now, but I saw that you had invested all of your money in Tesla in I don't know, 4 years ago, maybe, in like the high hundreds. And I hope I'm not bringing up like too sore of a spot, but I maybe it helps. I did kind of the same, a year and a half ago, put like half my money in Tesla and sold it way too soon, unfortunately. But not actually asking about the trade, more so the conviction that you had back then in Tesla, and what that company and maybe Elon Musk specifically have kind of meant to you as, first of all, just like a very innovative company that, obviously running your own company, totally different thing, but certain aspects such as like, the product experience versus like the student experience might be something that like draws parallels, or just as like a forward thinking founder looking at Elon Musk as sort of, the model these days, lessons or, learnings that you might have taken in kind of following his story and Tesla's progression over time.
Yeah. So the first thing, I was super intrigued by the idea of Tesla way early on, but I thought like I've always been in like fundamentally I feel like electric cars should be better. Like the physics is just better in an electric car, but the path to getting to the point where they can compete with 200 years of build out of infrastructure of combustion vehicles is just really difficult. So I actually watched a movie called Death of the Electric Car, like in high school, or I can't even, maybe it was after high school. I can't remember, but it was a really long time ago, and started following the industry quite a bit. And then when the Model S came out, I was like, oh my gosh, they did it. And from that point, like honestly, one of the things I wanted most in life was to have a Tesla. And then and I couldn't afford it, or at least couldn't justify buying. At the time it was $120,000 car. That's just ridiculous. Could barely afford rent. But then, so I just watched the development of the company from the early stages, and the way that they the pace at which they moved, and the way they took on things that should have been insurmountable for most companies was just jaw dropping. And then when I finally got to ride in a Model S, it was just so clear from the first ride that like this is the future. That it was probably a year later when I put 100% of my net worth in Tesla. And that was not like a time when you would look at the financials of Tesla and feel like this is a company that's going to win, or like, I mean, there's a reason the stock was so low and nobody really believed that it would work. So, but being a big Elon Musk fan and a follower of the company, I was like, no, I think like I believe so strongly that this is going to get there that I want to put my money where my mouth is. And I sadly had to sell it a couple years later to start Lambda School. Use all of that money to start Lambda School, where it would have been up like 20x from there by now. But I did buy, when they came out with the $35,000 Model 3, I bought one of those. And it's one of the things that, like, it's the perfect minimalist car too. It's not too much car. It's cheap, but it has, it's very simple, but it has everything that you want to have really well done, is really well done. And I just freaking love that car. I think I have no idea if they're overvalued or undervalued now. Now the stock is so high that I think everybody looks at it and gets nervous. But I do like, I can't see a path that doesn't lead to Tesla basically taking over the automotive industry and maybe a couple other industries. It's going to be a while, but I think their lead is, it's not insurmountable, but their lead, the lead they have plus the pace that they move at is just jaw dropping.
Yeah, I think it's funny enough. Like like I said, I only invested a year and a half ago, and also would have been up. I bought it like low 200s. Also would have been up like literally 20x at this point. It's like kills
Yeah.
kind of, but also saw like an interesting quote from Naval actually the other day that was like, I'm not going to try to quote it because I'll get it wrong, but it was basically like if you make a trade early in life and you make a killing off that, like that's the worst thing that could ever happen to you because like you won't, you don't need to worry about money anymore. And like, there's two sides to that as well, I guess. People could argue like a lot of people obviously have issues with money that are really super challenging and unfortunate. But I think there probably is something to be said for the fact that like maybe you wouldn't have built Lambda School if that trade, came through earlier. And look at all the good that Lambda School is doing for kids every day. So maybe there's a silver lining there, and I'm still waiting for mine. But maybe we wouldn't have this podcast if maybe we wouldn't be on the phone today if it wasn't for the trade, for selling it a little bit too early. So
Yeah. I mean, I did use the money to start Lambda School, and I think I'm up more. I mean, I'm definitely up more on paper. So we'll see if we make this work. Then you know there are at least 1,000, maybe 1,500 people who can attribute their newfound careers to that happening. So we'll hope that becomes millions.
yeah, that's awesome. So last thing, and then we'll wrap up. But you created a Twitter list. It's called like Techno Optimists or Techno Optimism, something like that. And it's all these people who are kind of at the cross, between technology and just people who are super optimistic about the future. And mostly reasonably so, not like just crazy optimistic for no particular reason. What does that kind of community and mindset mean to you? What are some of the things that you personally are excited about, assuming that you kind of would identify as like a technological optimist yourself? What are some of the things that like you're most excited about for the decades to come?
Yeah, I mean, so first on like I feel like fundamentally Americans are so focused on bad things because that we've been taught that if you focus on bad things that you can feel better about yourself. And I think that's it's just a mistake of our kind of national, like everything that you read about technology is dystopian, and nobody pays attention to all of the incredible good things that are happening as a result of technology, even though it's clearly in the data. It's, I don't think any of us would trade lives with someone who was born even 25 years ago, despite all the crazy things that are going on in the world. And it's, we're super, super plugged in to everything that's happening everywhere right now, to the extent that there's always going to be something big and crazy and scary that we're going to be talking about, even as life continually slowly gets better. And so I think like fundamentally the internet is in the hands of pretty much everybody right now. It's not entirely true, but way more people than it was. We can connect globally in a way that we couldn't. I think as government plays a bigger role in that, we're going to see more and more decentralization, which is really healthy. I think, I mean, even like from an income standpoint, if I look around at my family, of the seven of us, maybe one of us have a job that would have existed 30 years ago. And so, it's easy to look at jobs that are going away, but look at all the opportunity that's there. Like my little sister is a stay-at-home mom who has an e-commerce store that, she makes six figures on the side in like a few hours a week. And that's crazy. That was not possible, even 10 years ago in her specific instance. And so it may create a world where there's more bifurcation from the people who are able to lean into that world and those who are not. But I think if like the level of freedom and opportunity that we have is unrivaled anytime in human history, and by a lot, we can do more than, I wouldn't trade places with a king in the 1700s versus what I have today. And I think that's probably true of a lot of Americans. So, and I expect that to continue to be true in some ways that we can predict, and in many ways that I can't predict. And I think that's really cool, and we should be appreciative of that instead of focusing on the dystopian side of technology.
Yep, I totally agree, and that's an awesome way to end it. Thank you so much again, Austin, for taking the time and coming on today. It was awesome talking with you about all these, bit of a random set of things, but all really interesting to me, and hopefully cool for you to talk about. And looking forward to seeing the success of Lambda School moving forward for sure. Where can people go online to follow you and to follow Lambda School and see what's next?
Yeah, I'm Austen on Twitter, spelled with an E, Austen. Or you can follow Lambda School on Twitter or lambdaschool.com.